When discussing the discovery of America and the arrival of Europeans today, a simplified black and white picture dominates the public sphere. On one hand, we have a narrative of evil, greedy white men who destroyed a peaceful paradise, while on the other hand, a reality is omitted that was far more complex, harsher, and bloodier. Before a single European ship sighted the shores of the New World, the American continent was not a peaceful oasis of harmony and ecological coexistence, but a space of continuous wars, merciless extermination, and brutal empires that built their power on the blood of weaker neighbors. Great indigenous empires like the Aztecs, Incas, and Mayans did not arise through peaceful diplomatic negotiations or voluntary unifications. They were militaristic despotisms built on suffering, slavery, and the subjugation of tens of thousands of members of smaller tribes. The Aztecs, for example, daily drained resources, food, and human lives from conquered provinces. The collection of tribute also meant taking young men and women who ended up as slaves or sacrifices on altars. The local population in those conquered regions often eagerly awaited a change of power, because a worse master than the Aztec rulers could hardly come to them. One of the darkest sides of pre-Columbian civilizations was the mass institutionalized sacrifice of humans, which in some societies assumed industrial proportions. Aztec cities regularly carried out ritual killings of thousands of people, including children, to appease the gods. It was believed that if the sun was not nourished with human blood, it would extinguish, or rain would never fall on agricultural fields again. These bloody rituals provoked fear and dread even among other indigenous tribes, for whom such practice was the ultimate form of terror and a demonstration of power. In the world where indigenous tribes lived, war was an integral part of culture and survival. Young warriors acquired social status and reputation exclusively through the number of successfully completed kills and captures of enemies. For an ordinary person in those days, danger lurked behind every corner. The complete destruction of entire tribes, the extermination of villages, and displacement were a common occurrence centuries before the arrival of Europeans. When they later suffered from European weapons, they actually found themselves in a system of warfare that, in its cold efficiency, was merely a continuation of what they themselves had practiced against each other. Popular culture portrays the ritual smoking of the peace pipe as a sacred act of permanent reconciliation and brotherly love among tribes. Historical truth is significantly different. The calumet, or ritual pipe, was used to forge dangerously serious military alliances, declare war, negotiate slave trade, and confirm oaths. Smoke was considered a sacred medium that conveys the truth to the gods, but the purpose of that act was very often the preparation for the next bloody campaign against a third common enemy. Although in modern discussions, scalping is often sought to be portrayed as a barbaric invention that white men brought or imposed on Native Americans, historical facts clearly state otherwise. Taking scalps, body parts, and skulls as trophies of heroism existed among indigenous tribes long before the arrival of any European. Furthermore, certain tribes also practiced ritual cannibalism. The consumption of the meat of a war prisoner or a brave enemy chieftain had the goal of absorbing his strength, courage, and life force, thereby expressing respect for the enemy, but in an extremely terrifying way. When the first Spanish caravels appeared on the horizon, for the natives, it was a sight straight out of the wildest nightmare. Massive ships with white sails were described in legends as floating islands or mountains that float on water. An even greater shock was caused by the Spanish horsemen. Since North American natives had not seen horses until then, they panicked and thought that man and animal were a single creature, with two heads. Shining knightly armor, metal helmets, and the thick beards of Europeans created the impression of supernatural beings, or gods who had descended from heaven. It was precisely that initial shock and mythological status that cost the great indigenous rulers dearly. The famous Aztec ruler, Montezuma II, fatally hesitated and allowed a handful of Spaniards to enter the heart of his empire because he believed it was the return of the god Quetzalcoatl. When the people realized that the strangers were ordinary men obsessed with a greed for gold, it was too late. Montezuma ended up stoned by his own citizens, who branded him a traitor. A similar fate was experienced by the Inca emperor Atahualpa, who offered the Spanish conquerors an entire room filled with gold and silver for his ransom, only for the conquerors to treacherously execute him anyway, after taking the treasure, despite having promised him his life. One of the most common questions historians ask is why the millions of indigenous populations simply did not unite and expel a few hundred or thousand European adventurers. The answer lies in deep, centuries-old hatred and distrust among the tribes themselves. Native Americans did not care about a common Native American identity because such a concept did not exist. For them, a neighboring tribe was a mortal enemy. Many tribes enthusiastically welcomed Europeans and formed alliances with them, precisely so they could use the white man to destroy their traditional rivals. When they realized they had themselves become the target, it was too late. Frequent criticisms regarding firearms, cannons, and armor often overlook the fundamental rule of military history. Advanced technology has always brought victory. Just as in antiquity, the transition to an iron sword brought superiority on the battlefield, or as the invention of war chariots changed the courses of empires, so too was European military technology in the New World decisive. Europeans did not colonize America alone. They dominated parts of Africa and Asia with that same technological, organizational, and industrial superiority. Firearms, steel armor, as well as literacy and bureaucratic organization, these were factors that ancient and tribal structures simply could not long-term oppose. Viewing the history of Native Americans without modern ideological glasses reveals a truth that is unpleasant but authentic. The natives of America were not helpless, naive victims living in perfect peace, but people of flesh and blood with their flaws, their cruel wars, their empires, and their rituals. The arrival of Europeans brought a clash of two completely different worlds, in which a technologically superior, but morally no less cruel, conqueror won. Only when we accept that complexity can we understand the true drama and deep tragedy that unfolded on the soil of the New World.